You really did hit on it. It's not going to be uncommon to see a 40 bushel yield swing in the same field with different hybrids this year. And I've talked to some people that are seeing that already. That's a frustrating thing. You wonder what happened to this hybrid or that, but it's really underscoring why we talk about.
Hi, and welcome to Off the Cob number 3, Cornelius Seed Podcast special series. Well, as you folks know, harvest has started, and we're now seeing that the 2025 season did not pull any punches. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yields have been all over the place, and there's really plenty of blame to go around. To talk about that, we've got Craig Allaman, our lead agronomist, on the phone, and he's fresh off of genetic field days across the region and currently in his combine. So let's listen in as we unpack how a rapid and hot grain fill, coupled with southern rust and other diseases, are currently reshaping yields coming across that monitor. So let's get at it. Welcome, Craig.
Hey, Juan, how you doing?
Not too shabby. How many acres have you harvested today?
Oh, dear Lord, that's a really good question. 13 on the field I'm in, and I suppose we did about 40 on the one we were here before this. So
Okay, so it's been
50 and counting.
there you go, steady going. I appreciate you making time for this. I know you've been really busy and have got a really good handle on the first impressions of what harvest is looking for us across the Cornelius country now. So before we get into the weeds on diseases and hybrids, and let's just set the stage real quick. How would you sum up that 2025 growing season for the folks that they're listening from the cab right now?
Well, we had pretty good emergence at planting. We were a little cool in May, and then second week in June, it really warmed up and turned into ideal growing conditions, and never really cooled off until probably the end of August. So for a while there, that was good. We had plentiful rain most everywhere. I've never seen a July where there's good growing conditions. I think probably greenhouse conditions and just rain after rain. And then we would like to have had it cool down and slow down a little bit because we had just a rapid grain fill period, way too quick for corn. Corn likes long, cool, slow grain fill. Probably not so bad for beans because beans don't mind the heat. And then the joker in the deck was definitely the southern rust, disease in general, but southern rust is the one that really nipped us. So
Okay.
we probably finished a little quicker than we would like for sure.
We've done a few episodes throughout the season, and you've always said there's plenty of season left, and cautioning folks. And there was that time period where the Tassel wrap deal came along, and it seems like a lot of that's tying back to that rapid growth, right, and that heat. So you've walked many plots right now, from internal customer ones we call profit plots to other independent third party research, and then here this earlier this week the genetic supplier field days. Now that you're harvesting your own acres and you've seen all that, it's all in the back of your head, plus I'm sure phone calls you've got, what's a common thread you're seeing across both trials and commercial fields?
Well, variability is not uncommon. We generally will get that every year in the footprint that we cover, but we really weren't expecting this kind of variability. I'm going to say, mid-July, we had a pretty good crop going across the Corn Belt. That's probably what USDA is, I guess, base their yields on. I guess they quit looking the last half of the growing season, but so it's going to depend a lot on how much southern rust you had, how early it set in, and then your rainfall really in August, because we had heat everywhere. So that wasn't the best case scenario for corn. But if you coupled that with not getting enough rain in August, which we did definitely in some of our geography, mainly to the east, and then southern rust, it wasn't real variable across Iowa. Iowa got hit pretty hard. The closer you were to the Mississippi and Illinois, the more southern rust there was. But there's pockets on in to eastern Illinois where they didn't get a lot, and I think we'll see some big yields on the corn there. But again, the variability that can be from area to area, but we're really seeing it hybrid to hybrid, especially again across the areas that had more southern rust. And some hybrids have a pretty decent tolerance and others not so much. And that has really shown up this year. And then the other thing that can cause some variability is whether you sprayed with a fungicide, what you sprayed with, when, and all that. So
Well,
that's the name of the game is variability.
variability right now, and it sounds like there's a 1-2 punch right on the yield. First, we've got that grain fill, right, and you're seeing some more shallow kernels or not as deep kernels, and like you said, ideally we want that long, slow grain fill period. We know that this rapid hot grain fill affects the kernel size and the test weight. What makes it feel like it's 2 weeks early?
Harvest timing for one thing. I mean, personally, we're in the field 2 weeks early. I was black layered in August, at the very end of August. I've never black layered in August before. So those are the indicators that we use on the timing of things. We're going to need to be careful to kind of separate out what was it that knocked the top end off of this crop. I think if we did not have southern rust present, we would have definitely lost some bushels anyway to the rapid grain fill period, just because corn likes to cool off at night, rest, and put that energy into filling those kernels. And when we have hot nights, it has to respire, let moisture off, just to keep cooling itself. And so that would have taken some yield out of the crop. And then so we add southern rust into it that probably shut the plant down before it had a chance to finish filling those kernels. So that adds to it, and probably a bigger yield deterrent than the hot summers.
So southern rust is obviously a headline, right? And but it wasn't the only disease out there. And from your perspective, how much yield or test weight did southern rust take? If and how did that interact with whether it was gray leaf out there or tar?
I'm going to give you a little bigger range than I normally would or would like to, but I just talking with enough people and seeing some of the yields come in so far, and we get more when we see plots where we have real resistant hybrids versus hybrids that are not. But I'm going to say 40 to 80 bushel, probably just to laying on the doorstep of southern rust there. And we did have not much gray leaf, but we did have tar do its normal thing. It moved in really late. And then northern, that likes the same kind of cool temperatures as tar does, got active late again too. But I'm pretty confident we pulled southern rust completely out of the picture, that the amount of tar and northern corn leaf blight that we had would not have been a yield deterrent whatsoever. I just don't think there was enough out there. We held those two off long enough with fungicides not to be a yield problem. So the southern rust is the problem child this year.
Okay, well, and I'd hate to even throw words out like black swan, but it seems like it's that type of event. And now one of the things there with that, with as we talk about southern rust, and we'll move on from it, we won't beat that one too much, but as you've told us, it doesn't overwinter, and it you can't predict if it'll be here next year. Heck, probability of it being the exact same pressure next year might not be the case. But as why I bring that up is it's obvious that it's separated the winners from the losers now. When you look at across those trial plots that you were at recently, what stood out about how different hybrids handled the pressure? Was it just the fungicide pass, or was it other things?
Well, we early in the week, I was at internal Cornelius plot customer plots, and so we could see some difference there. Although I was in areas in Illinois where we didn't have a lot of rust, but in central Iowa, there we were looking at genetic plots. So we're looking at hybrids that we may produce next year to sell the following summer, and a lot of times they won't spray those with a fungicide, so we can see how those hybrids held up to different diseases. They don't expect to basically lose the data in those plots because of that. But where we were at, um, that data will just be junk. We won't even look at those locations because the majority of the hybrids in there, I would say, probably died maybe even before black layer. They were so the the grain was so um, shallow and light, and so it won't be an indication of how that hybrid will actually yield. But amongst that, you'd find scattered hybrids that you could definitely see had either excellent or very good tolerance to southern rust. And even though they had some tar, had some northern corn leaf blight in some cases, they were able to go ahead and really look fairly normal. I mean, the ear size was pretty normal. When you chuck that ear off and you twisted it in your hands, that those kernels were tight, full, had good depth to them, and those ears had regular weight. And the ones that were affected with southern rust, they were just spongy. The kernels were loose, very shallow. So I mean that 40 to 80 bushel is going to be a real thing. That's the kind of loss that we're going to see due to that southern rust.
Not only are you managing disease, but it seems like the genetic diversity that you had out in the field um, could really come in clutch. And I mean, it sounds like you saw hybrids that were dead, and then some with ears tipped down, and others that still had some green leaves. Um, what are some of those characteristics that do you believe allowed some of those hybrids to still finish grain fill normally? And what does that tell us about selecting genetics for what you want next year, right? No 2 years are the same. I'm just curious on that approach.
Yeah, well, it's great to see those hybrids that have good southern rust, and if their yield, in other locations that didn't have southern rust, if their yield is as good or better than our existing hybrids, then that's a good chance we'll be bringing those into the lineup. We've also got really good ratings. You can't get good ratings on some of these diseases because they're not present very often. Southern rust, since it is a disease that overwinters down in the deep south and then has to blow up in storms, we don't always see southern rust. It's a one in X amount of years type disease. But we don't select hybrids just for one disease only, and we'll be cautioning our customers next year. Yeah, I know we had a crazy southern rust where we had a good fungicide program. We we were pretty much able to preserve most or all of that yield. So we can still address southern rust with a fungicide. And there's a lot of other things that go into where we place a hybrid, soil types, other diseases, rootworm control, things like that. So, um, and just spreading the risk out by getting diversity in our genetic, germplasm, where the suppliers are, and some of them will react good one year and not so good the next. So we'll have a lot of things that will determine what hybrid we want to place on an individual field. And while southern rust is always important, because we see how injurious it can be, there's going to be a lot of other factors. So we'll need to kind of calm down our emotions when we make those decisions this fall and through the winter.
It was a tough year, and we talked about this a few episodes ago when we talked about if it was too late to spray or not, as we were seeing all this kind of explode, and that rust not only did it come in early and quick, but it came in quick and it took over quick. See, plant health was the biggest challenge this season, and throwing inputs at the management practice may not have been an option for everybody, especially with the way the market was, and so as we just touch base a little bit on this fungicide timing and application method, what would you say is the biggest difference and the efficacy of the fungicide things? Because I've seen some folks that were saying, "Hey, I've put some down. It may have stopped the bleeding, but we still bled pretty good." And I know you've stressed if you're gonna do it, focus on one that's got a long residual. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you have any feedback, thoughts, or comments around that timing application method? Do you think that multiple applications is going to become the norm? Or Craig's
I
thoughts
think
on
we'll
that?
have I think we'll have a lot of I think we have a lot of information to sort through when we get done with the season, and and see what worked best. My recommendation in general for a few years now has been a long residual, one of these newer, longer residual fungicides at R1. We know R1 is, if you're going to choose one time period to put it on, is the best time period for multiple reasons. But if you use a long residual, that should bring us into the tar spot season pretty clean of other diseases. And I think when tar spot sets in late, if we don't have anything else on the plan, I think tar spot's not going to really hurt us very much. So that's kind of that recommendation. I don't think anything held. Even the long residuals didn't hold that southern rust off. And you got to remember, these fungal diseases are going to have several cycles depending on what our weather is like. So if we stay warm and moist and wet, they're gonna cycle and blow up and move and cycle and blow up and move, 2, 3, 4 times during the growing season. And I think we stayed warm clear to the end of August. So southern rust just kept cranking and cranking and cranking. Probably the month of July and the month of August, that may be the longest time period I've ever seen maybe one disease keep cycling. So we ran out, I think, with everything, but there was a lot of approaches. I just did the one application of Veltium at R1, and we've got disease here at the end, but our grain's tight. We're not going to be the yield that we thought we would be. We're 25, 30 bushel off of last year, but that easily could have been due just to the heat of grain fill. But we've got a lot of people that have done 2 applications, in R1, and then later in August. I've talked to guys that have done put it in with the herbicide, the post herbicide, and then done an R1 and then done a later one. So we'll have plenty of information to be able to sort that out and see what worked the best. But we may never see these exact circumstances again. So
Yeah, absolutely. The current year is always a great year to learn and teach, and not to predict, right? For especially as much as Mother Nature um, has a say in the crop. Well, we talked quite a bit about the rust, obviously, and canopy diseases, but it wasn't just above ground where there may have been issues. What kind of below ground issues, maybe like crown rot, that would have shown up or more than expected? Obviously, that's something that happens earlier with Fusarium, but thoughts on that department?
yeah, I've seen the normal characters. Some anthracnose we're starting to see. That's probably always our most prominent stalk rot, but we've had some pretty bad ground rot last couple of years, and that is a result of Fusarium setting in at the seedling stage, infecting those roots and getting on up into the crown, and then at the end of it's rotting that crown all season long, and at the end of the season, it finally just shuts the plumbing off completely down there, and then those plants will die a little bit early. The rest of the plants around them might be green, and we call them ghost, be a ghost plant. It's just completely dead. And so I thought with our good emergence, we might get away from that a little bit this year, but I've seen some areas that probably worse than normal. It's usually kind of a scattered disease, but every now and again we'll have a year where we see it in patches, bigger areas in the field, and I have seen some of that this year. So we'll see how that one ends up playing out. But any of those stalk diseases can make, a wind will take that plant down. It's just nothing left there, and there's not much stalk integrity. But we have that as also from just dying early because of southern rust or just because we ran out of moisture or the heat and everything else. So I don't think stock quality is good almost anywhere in our footprint, and that's why customers need to be getting out there and getting this corn harvested. And we're harvesting, we're in the 16% moisture range right now or less already. We've only been going a week, so it's really dried down rapidly, and it's time to get the crop out.
Okay, no, thank you for that. You mentioned seeing that despite good emergence. Does anything in particular drive that? And are there any seed treatments or early interventions on the horizon?
Um, you're talking about the fusarium getting in there and
Yeah.
causing the crown rot?
Yep.
Yeah, we did experiment with a compound this year that I think Looks like the results have been definitely an improvement. Um, so in soybeans, we're going to get the Timerium, whatever they end up calling that in the soybean package, which basically is a nematicide. It's soybean cyst nematode, but it's also as good a SDS as an Olivo or Saltro, and we're getting some red crown rot and frog eye and Septoria brown spot. So that hopefully is going to get registered. We'll be able to use it next year, and then a couple of years behind that, um, hopefully we'll get registered on corn because it is also an excellent fusarium product. So that's probably going to be a little bit of a game changer for our fusarium control. As an industry, it's been kind of weak. We don't have anything that's excellent on fusarium.
Okay. No, well, thank you on that. I figured since we were on the topic and you guys are out there scouting, so you brought up a perfect segue. We mentioned soybeans, and we're almost, Will appreciate in his perspective saving the best for last, right? And uh, we've talked about the heat. We know soybeans love heat. For the areas that have harvested, or even just folks scouting, we're hearing reports of high pod counts with good potential where rain did fall, and but also and some tiny beans where it stayed dry. What are you seeing in our footprint, our immediate footprint, and how might that shake out here as folks are prepping to harvest? And obviously, corn's coming out first.
Yeah, so I'm cautiously optimistic where corn has been pretty disappointing, although there's going to be some areas where it's really good. Beans are going to kind of be the same way, but probably a bigger area in our footprint. We have a pretty good opportunity to have I think, some pretty good soybean yields. Soybeans do not mind those warm nights. In fact, they would mind the cool, coolness more than the warmth, the opposite of corn. And so, they should have breezed through the grain fill. The pod count was good. So if we had good moisture, if you were in an area that received some good moisture, in grain fill, particularly during August, then I think we could see some pretty excellent soybean yields. Now, you don't have to go very far east of here, so somewhere here in Illinois, Central, wherever that may be. And we saw some last week up there, around the Dixon area in Illinois. They're just going to be pretty small if we didn't have that rain in August. So as we move through Illinois into Indiana, Ohio, and southern Illinois, Missouri, I'm going to guess that the bean yields will be just a bit more average. But maybe Iowa, since corn was such a challenge, is going to have some pretty good beans to make up for it a little bit.
Oh yeah, hopefully that's the case. And like you said, with the August rain we got for that will be key for those beans.
August rain always makes bean yields.
Okay,
Always has, always will.
there we go. Well, it sounds like corn clearly struggled with that heat disease and that 1-2 punch all across the board, and beans didn't necessarily react the same way, and have been able to handle that a little better now. So, well,
Yeah.
we've seen highs and lows in corn and soybeans, and as growers are either wrapping up harvest, or getting going earlier than they thought. Is there any lessons or any final thoughts that we want to put out there as folks might be listening to us as they're either getting things ready or maybe already combining?
No, no, I don't think so. I think just if you've been wondering if it's time, it's time. I think there's a lot of people that have started, but just 2 years in a row now, this crop is way drier than we initially thought, and it's just drying down really rapidly. We've had perfect conditions. It's still warm, and the humidity's been pretty low, and I mean, it's just dropping like a rock. So
Mm.
time to get going. The stocks are not very good in most cases.
Scouring the webs and what I see across X and other folks that have been harvesting and really similar sentiment. And I guess for folks that are seeing that yield variation, rest assured that you're not alone in this. But Craig, I think we can land this plane, and I think just to kind of recap, because we talked about it a bit, and we were heavy on the southern rust, but one top end yield we know it was clipped by that short and hot grain fill, and those warm nights kept that plant respiring, and instead of packing starch like we wanted them to. Two, we've got southern rust. That's going to be the primary yield thief this year, programs and tolerant hybrids that finish grain are going to be what stands out. Like you said, variability, we'll see some big swings and maybe even some really good record crops, but also the opposite story. And I guess last is that ultimately just diversifying genetics, placing products smartly. Winners are going to change with the weather, and yeah, fungicides can will definitely be a plus for a crop that had an average southern rust tolerance. But there can still be some right combos out there. So keep scouting, keep an eye out, get out there, and make sure you're assessing your harvest plan. And I think just the last thing I want to mention there is, um, it's gonna be an unbelievably informative post harvest meeting, right? From all the data that you've
Oh,
collected. Yeah,
oh boy.
yeah.
Yeah, is it ever?
Is it ever?
It'd be a good one to attend.
I completely agree. They're always well placed, and I know we'll put out there, and anyone can come. But they're very informative, lots of good questions, and not even just what you're getting from you and who we have to speak, but just what we learn from each other, right? And so,
Hey,
you're,
before you ask me what my final thoughts are that you usually do, you really did hit on it. It's not going to be uncommon to see a 40 bushel yield swing in the same field with different hybrids this year. And I've talked to some people that are seeing that already. That's a frustrating thing. You wonder what happened to this hybrid or that, but it's really underscoring why we talk about planting multiple hybrids and being diverse in what you're planting, because yeah, it'd been great to have all of that hybrid that did the best, but you easily, if you just plant one hybrid, you could have had all the hybrids that did the worst, and
yeah,
that would be even a worse day. So we can't predict what the weather's going to be, and these hybrids will react differently, to whatever the weather is on a given year. So stick with the strategy of staying diverse. It's pretty important, and
I,
planting multiple hybrids.
I guess all we have left, folks, is you're not alone out there, and we just wish you a blessed and safe rest of the harvest season. And if you guys have any questions, send them our way. We'd love to bring them onto the podcast as well.